Little bit French, just this much French. He said, "Be gone with you! The devil himself was French!" Black Bart hated the French almost as much as he hated the Spaniards, and that was this much. So, at last, the final pirate chef came hobbling towards him. And I say hobbling because this gentleman had one leg missing and a wooden peg leg in its place. One arm missing and a hook in place of that. And one eye with a patch over the top of it. He said. "Oh, this is sounding promising," said Black Bart. "You're quite mad, aren't you?" That I be, Black Bart, and I be the finest pirate chef who ever griddled bacon. Sounds very good, and to be honest, you're the last person, so I'm probably going to hire you anyway, but you don't mind me asking, how did you lose your bits? Well, there'll be a long and interesting story about all of those. Oh, what do you want to know first? He said, "How do you lose your leg?" We were sailing upon the 7 seas, down by the coasts of Africa! When a crew of Barbary corsairs, vicious and savage and howling their battle cries, boarded us with their scimitars. A giant muscle man sliced off my leg at the knee. And so I had a peg put on it. It's quite a story. I bet you could tell, you could keep people up at night. You could dine off that story for years, couldn't you? That I do. Now, what about your hand? My hand, yes. That's also missing. And there's a story about that. Well, suffice it to say that off the coasts of the Caribbean Isles we were coursing around, looking for prey, when a Royal Navy sloop hove into view and blasted our ship with grape shot, and those tiny bits of lead that were fired across the deck of our ship carried me hand clean off the end of me arm. And so I had this hook instead. Ooh. Oh, this is quite stirring and exciting stuff, isn't it? Says Black Bar Robert. So, now there must be a story behind how you lost the eye. And he said, there is. A bird pooed in it. He said, "You lost your entire eye because a bird pooed in it?" He said, it was me first day with the hook. Oh, that was a lot of R-ing in one story. Where's that?
Brutally stole off all the natives. But it was a fortress. The fortress itself was mainly designed to keep pirates at bay. So they had tons of cannons facing out to sea, but they had absolutely nothing on the jungle side. So he landed a little down from the city, snuck round, raided the city from behind, and indeed took it within a few hours. Raided it completely. The men retreated to the fort and holed up there with the rest of the treasure, and he couldn't get in. So, brutal monster that he was, he rounded up all the monks and nuns that were in the city, and all the women and children, and made large ladders and made them walk very slowly towards the fortress, in the hopes that they wouldn't dare shoot the innocent bystanders. But unfortunately the lust of the Spanish for their gold was greater than their desire to protect their women and children, and they began to open fire. But nonetheless, eventually, the ladders went up to the wall, and they took the fortress, and they took all the gold. And he was so satisfied at his haul that he ended up sailing off to Tortuga, or maybe it was Port Royal actually, in Jamaica, and had a wonderful time of it until he'd spent all his money, and had to go pirating again. So he got another bunch of buccaneers, 800 buccaneers, and sailed to Cow Island to have a secret conference of pirates, I guess, a drunken party basically, where they all lined up, they discussed their plans to go raiding more Spanish treasure fleets. But unfortunately the men got a bit excited, and as they were wildly firing their muskets in the air, some sparks caught the gunpowder magazine and blew half of them sky high. Luckily, Morgan himself was sitting on one side of the great big table where the pirate captains were all arrayed. But the other side of the table, everyone was killed, and he just got some singed eyebrows. He was alright. But despite that minor setback, he decided to set off once again. And this time they thought they'd raid the port city, the lakeside city of Maracaibo, which is in Venezuela. They sailed into the bay, it's this great big lagoon, and they began to raid the city, but they didn't have very much wealth, and they were quite disappointed in their haul. They tortured the inhabitants horribly, pressing them beneath boards with rocks on top in order to get them to reveal where they'd buried their gold and silver, but nothing was forthcoming. And by the time they'd wasted several days doing that, a Spanish fleet had got word of the attack and had blocked off the entrance to the harbour. 3 large galleons. Now pirates, I know you see all the films with pirates and their massive big galleons and so on and so forth, but most pirates didn't use boats like that at all. They usually used small, fast schooners because they were small, and they were fast, and they were cheap, and they were easy to hide, and you could get in and get out really quickly. Sensible tactics, really. So, poor old Morgan had only a relatively small boat, and another boat that he captured from the Spanish when he came to Maracaibo. He didn't know what to do. So he came up with a cunning plan. He took the larger ship and disguised it as an admiral of the fleet ship with a flag on top, and he put logs up on it with hats on and melons. Honestly, I can't believe this trick worked, honestly. It must have been really stupid. Well, everyone was drunk at sea, of course, because no one could drink water, so that's probably why it worked. And loads of palm fronds and tar, and they spread the whole ship and turned it into a fire ship. But they disguised it, as I say, as the admiral of the fleet ship. And the other ship they attached some burning ropes to make it look like a fire ship. So the fake admiral of the fleet ship was the real fire ship, and the fake fire ship was the real admiral of the fleet ship. All the men were on board. I think that's right. You got that? Anyway, so they towed this ship out, and it looked like obviously this admiral of the fleet ship was towing the fire ship. The fire ship was the admiral of the fleet ship with all the men on board, and the admiral of the fleet ship was the fire ship. And 12 men stayed on board to guide it towards the largest of the Spanish vessels and grapple it and haul it close and fire off pistols and light burning ropes and then jump into sea. At least that was the plan. There's no record of whether they survived or not. I suspect not. But they were very brave and they did it anyway, and by the time the Spanish had realised what was happening and spotted that it was melons on logs and not men at all on board the ship, it was too late! The Spanish galleon was ablaze, and the fake fire ship raided one of the other ships, quickly took it, and the others panicked. The last ship panicked, sailed in to try and get to the fort in Maracaibo to hold it up and take it over. But they floundered on the sands there because they didn't know the waters. So they were forced to abandon ship. But they got into the fort, and they manned the guns and were able to blockade the entrance to the bay that way. So still, Captain Morgan was unable to escape. So this is another ridiculous strat. I can't believe this worked. The Spanish must have been really stupid, because his next plan was to make it look like he was going to attack the fort. He got all his men into boats and rowed them out to the jungle below the fort where they couldn't be seen. And then rowed the boats back, but with the men who were sitting up in before lying down in the bottom so that it looks like they'd got off the boat when actually they were just getting taken back to the ship. And he did this repeatedly, like some old silent film where people run round and round the set and in and out the doors, like 1 million times or whatever. And at the end, the Spanish thought they were planning a massive night attack. So they moved all the guns to the other side of the fort, where they thought the men were hiding, and waited. And when night came, they sailed off and got away. Stupid Spanish. So Captain Morgan basically made a living from playing cheap tricks and robbing and murdering innocent Spanish people. And in the end, he was rewarded by the British government, because we liked to reward people for that sort of thing in those days, by making him governor of Jamaica, where he drank himself to death, died fat and corpulent of infection, which, to be honest, is what all pirates really wanted to do in the end. That's what real pirates did. And he didn't stay in the ground long either, because a few years later there was a great earthquake that destroyed Port Royal in Jamaica and caused the graveyard, half the town in fact, fell into the sea with this massive earthquake, and all the bodies were seen floating on the surface. So I dare say his bloated, rotten corpse went down to Davy Jones' locker in the end. So there you go. Quite right too.
So dangerous they don't run.
Named a rum after him. Do you know my favourite thing about Captain Morgan rum is? It's got a picture on the front of the bottle of a massive pirate stood there on a barrel going, ah! And underneath it says, please drink responsibly.
That is quite interesting.
Thanks, crazed pirate. Like,
I'll take your advice.
Pirates are, well, of course, well known for drunken antics and being dangerous people. It's one of those old things, I think, that you kind of go, oh, let's dress our kids up as pirates. And you think, they're basically sea muggers, aren't they? You know what I mean? It's like future generations dressing their kids up as the IRA. It's a bit of an odd choice, but... and whilst they were disreputable people, generally, you know, scum and villainy, one and all, they were people that even pirates regarded as the worst kind of people that you could possibly be, who made their life from the sea, who made their life from death. And they were wreckers. Does anybody know what wreckers are? Well, if you're on a boat... He's a wrecker! You're on a boat and you're trying to find a safe port, you look for a light. At the safe port, they put a big light up, so if it was dark and you were lashed about in a storm, you could see the light and steer your ship towards it, and you'd be safe. And that would be brilliant, and you'd be, you know, you wouldn't die. Now wreckers, on the other hand, Cornwall was plagued with these. Wreckers stand atop a cliff with a great light, but not a safe port. There below them are rocks, always rocks. And ships see these lights, think they're going to be safe, steer towards them, break their ships upon rocks. And in the morning the wreckers go down and take what they can find on the beach. Hideous men, awful men. Whole villages were supported by this activity. But the most famous wrecker of all wasn't Cornish, was in fact Welsh. You get into it with all these cruel Welsh people, nothing. And he was a man named Waff, who got so good at wrecking, the rumour went round that he may have made a deal with the devil himself. In fact, he got so good at wrecking, he bought a castle. There's a place in Wales called Dunraven Castle, it's on the coast, and there's a huge cliff that drops down the side of it, and there's massive rocks sticking out all around it. And apparently, he regularly would go out with a great light, and boats would see it, out there, in a storm, with waves as high as this house, where any light, any port will bring you hope. And they'd steer towards it and meet their doom upon those rocks. In fact, he became so wealthy from it, when his son was maybe 15, he could pay for him to go and be educated. I mean, whoa, that's a thing to do, and not just educated in Britain. I mean, you think now, you know, your tuition fees for university is going to be expensive. Then it was way more, and even more so if you sent your son off to Paris, or to the continent to be educated. But he made so much money from wrecking that he could afford to do it. Maybe he had made a deal with the devil, I don't really know. But at the age of 15, his son was sent off. Plenty of coins in his pocket to be educated. Now the years pass as years do, and Waff continues to make his money, as he always makes his money, and to sell the goods that they find on the beach. And it comes to the age where his son's coming back from education. 6 years he's been away, 6 years on the continent, 21 he's going to be, coming back. Maybe I should throw my son a party, thinks Watt, the wrecker lord of Dunraven Castle. Maybe I'll throw him the best damn party he could ever want, to welcome him back, and for his education. But parties are expensive things. Maybe one more ship. And that night, of course, the storms roll in. Oh, as they always do. A brilliant night for wrecking. And he goes out with his men upon that hilltop, there on the cliff, with a great light, and the wind and rain is lashing down horizontal now, enough to sting a man's skin from his body. And they see the boat now out at sea. They can't hear it because the wind's howling so long, and they light the great lantern and lure the ship. And even over those howling storms and thunder and lightning, they can hear the screams of men and the breaking of hulls as the ship is lured to its rocks. Now, as the dawn light creeps over the horizon, the storm's abated, and Waff and his men go down to the beach to see what they have found. And they do what they always do. There are boxes here, crates there, cargo lost, half buried in the sand. That will come later, of course, the collecting of that. First things first, to see if anyone would survive. The odd man here and there, head stove in, if life is still in their body. You don't want anyone surviving a wrecking, of course. They'll hang you high for that. And Wolf's down there amongst his men as they're looking about to see what they found. And he sees a young man lying there in the sand with a great ring on his finger, a great golden ring. Oh, I'll be having that, thinks Wolf. The boy stirs. Ah, he's still alive. And so he draws out his knife, grabs hold of the boy's hair, pulls his head up and cuts his throat without even so much as looking at his eyes. And then he pulls the great ring from the boy's finger and looks at it. And then his heart sinks. For there on the ring is the sign of Dunraven Castle. His sign, the very ring he gave to his son to go away to be educated 6 years previously. So, it could be said that Wolf had a fate most poetic. Killed his own son with his wrecking ways, and now that kind of remorse does a man's soul bad. And so, what can you do then? He turned to that solace that all men turn to. He turned to drink. And often he'd be heard crying, wandering across the hilltop, crying for his son into the storms. No more wrecking for him. No more wrecking for him. And there's one thing that you'll always find in the bottom of a cup, even if it isn't solace. And that's unsure footing. Oh no, his footing was unsure out there on the cliff top. And down, down he fell. Drunk as a man can be, down to the rocks where he lured so many men, broken apart. And that is how he died. Now, whether his soul had been sold to the devil to become quite as good a wrecker, I don't know. I don't know whether his soul went down to hell, but it is said if you end up near Dunraven Castle on the coast of Wales, you're better off on the land, by the way, rather than a boat. Especially when the storms are rolling in. Because when the storms roll in, it's said that occasionally still now, there on the cliff tops, when the waves rise as high as this house, and any boat out at sea would call any light a good port in a storm, then it is said, above the howling of the wind, can hear the mournful cry of Wolf himself. There upon the cliff, mourning for all the souls that he drowned, mourning for his own son's cut throat, and mourning for his own fate, to wander this earth until the end of all.
Avast,